At midnight, I drove 238 miles through a flood and found my father outside a closed motel. My own brother and his wife had drained his bank account and changed the locks on his house. I made one single phone call. By sunrise, the wire transfers were frozen and police were knocking on their door. My brother screamed, asking what I did. I simply smiled. My name is Zuri. I am 32 years old, and I work as a forensic accountant. I track missing money for a living. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your family from greedy relatives who thought they could take advantage of the elderly. Growing up in Charlotte, North Carolina, my father Elijah was a pillar of the community. He was a proud, hard-working African-American man who spent 40 years building a beloved chain of soul food restaurants. He started with one tiny kitchen and expanded it into a commercial real estate empire. He taught me everything about hard work, integrity, and the value of a dollar. But my older brother Jamal learned an entirely different lesson. Jamal was 36 years old and the undisputed golden child of the family. While I was the quiet girl who loved math and spreadsheets, Jamal was loud, charismatic, and always dressed in custom-tailored suits. He drove leased sports cars and called himself a financial investor. In reality, he was drowning in debt and constantly looking for a quick payout. My father always forgave Jamal. When we were teenagers, Jamal would steal $20 bills from the restaurant cash registers. My father would just sigh and say the boy needed to find his way. That blind spot for my brother eventually turned into a nightmare when Jamal married Ashley. Ashley was a 32-year-old white woman who viewed my family as nothing more than a giant ATM. She was arrogant, performative, and deeply manipulative. She loved showing off her wealthy black husband at country club dinners, but she despised the actual hard work that built our family legacy. The crisis began on a Friday evening. A massive storm front had stalled over the Carolinas, bringing torrential rain and severe flooding. I was at my apartment in Atlanta finishing up a forensic audit for a client when my phone rang. It was a restricted number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. A raspy, weak voice spoke on the other end. It was my father. He sounded disoriented and terrified. He told me he was freezing and sitting outside the old Starlight Motel on Route 85. He said Jamal had dropped him off hours ago and promised to return with keys to a new house. I dropped my coffee mug on the floor. The Starlight Motel had been boarded up and abandoned for 5 years. The temperature was plunging and the rain was coming down in sheets. I tried to ask him more questions, but his phone died. Panic seized my chest. My father was 68 years old and recovering from a recent bout of bronchitis. Being left outside in a freezing flood was a death sentence. I grabbed my keys, my heavy coat, and my work laptop. I did not even stop to pack a bag. I ran to my SUV and started the engine. The drive from Atlanta to Charlotte was pure torture. The rain was blinding. My windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the sheets of water. The highway was nearly empty because local authorities had issued severe flood warnings advising everyone to stay off the roads. But I pushed the accelerator down, keeping my eyes locked on the faint glow of the lane markers. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Why would Jamal leave him there? Where was Ashley? Why did my father sound so weak? I called Jamal repeatedly during the drive, but it went straight to voicemail. I called Ashley, but she rejected my calls. It took me 4 hours to navigate the treacherous 238 miles. When I finally pulled into the crumbling parking lot of the Starlight Motel, the scene broke my heart into a million pieces. The motel sign was rusted and dark. Weeds pushed through the cracked asphalt. Under the sagging awning of the main office, I saw a figure slumped in a wheelchair. It was my father. The rain was blowing sideways, soaking his thin jacket. He was shivering violently, his chin resting on his chest. I threw the car into park and leaped out into the freezing downpour. I ran to him, screaming his name, Dad. I fell to my knees in the puddle beneath his wheelchair and grabbed his hands. They were ice cold. He looked up at me with confused, bloodshot eyes. His lips were blue and his breathing was shallow and ragged. Zuri, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the roaring rain. You came. Of course I came, I cried, pulling my thick wool coat off my shoulders and wrapping it around his shaking frame. That was when I noticed what he was holding. His hands were locked tightly around a worn wooden recipe box. It was my late mother's box containing the original handwritten recipes that launched our entire restaurant chain. It was the only thing of value he had with him. No suitcase, no warm clothes, no medication. Jamal told me to wait here. He coughed, his whole body shuddering with the effort. He said he was bringing the keys to a nice new place for me. I have been waiting for 6 hours, Zuri. I think he forgot about me. I did not forget, Dad. I said, my voice trembling with a rage so intense it physically burned my chest. He abandoned you. I maneuvered his wheelchair through the muddy water and carefully helped him into the passenger seat of my SUV. I turned the heater on full blast and wrapped him in a fleece blanket I kept in the back seat. His teeth were chattering uncontrollably. I buckled his seatbelt and wiped the rain from his face. I promised him he was safe now. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The warmth of the car slowly began to combat the freezing dampness, but the chill inside my heart remained. I pulled out my phone and dialed Jamal again. This time the call connected, but Jamal did not answer. Ashley did. "Hello, Zuri," she said, her voice dripping with casual annoyance. I could hear jazz music playing in the background and the unmistakable clinking of expensive wine glasses. They were at a restaurant. They were enjoying a fine dining experience while my father was freezing to death outside an abandoned building. "You threw my father out into the street during a Category 3 storm," I screamed, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Ashley let out an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, Zuri, please stop being so dramatic. Your dad is getting dementia. He must have wandered off on his own. We did not throw him out. We simply sold that dusty old house to put him in a nice modern medical facility. He needs professional care." I was in a wheelchair at a boarded-up motel. I yelled, my voice echoing in the small cabin of the SUV. He said Jamal dropped him off. "He does not have dementia, Ashley. He has a slight cough and a greedy son. You left him to die." "You need to calm down," Ashley said, her tone shifting to that condescending register she always used when she wanted to put me in my place. "Jamal has the medical and financial proxy now. We are making the adult decisions to preserve the family legacy. You have always been just a boring numbers girl, Zuri. Leave the real business to us and go back to your spreadsheets. Do not call us again tonight. We are celebrating." The line went dead. She hung up on me. I sat in the car listening to the rain hammer against the roof. My father had fallen asleep in the passenger seat, his breathing labored and heavy. I looked at his weathered face, the face of a man who had worked from dawn until dusk for 40 years to provide for us. He had paid for Jamal to wear designer clothes and drive luxury cars. And this was how Jamal repaid him, by dumping him in the rain like trash to steal his property. Ashley told me to go back to my boring spreadsheets. She clearly did not understand what a forensic accountant actually does. I do not just count money. I track it. I hunt it down. I find every hidden transaction, every deleted wire transfer, every secret offshore account. I expose liars for a living. And my brother had just made the biggest mistake of his miserable life by challenging me. I opened my laptop and balanced it on the center console. I connected it to my mobile hotspot. My father had always trusted me with his back-end financial codes because I managed the corporate taxes for the soul food chain. I logged into the highly secure banking portal that held his personal and business assets. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard security checks, using the dual authentication tokens I kept on my phone. The screen loaded. I stared at the numbers, and a cold wave of pure fury washed over me. The primary savings account, which held his retirement funds, should have shown a balance of $1.2 million. It showed zero. The commercial checking account for the restaurants was completely drained. I ran a rapid trace on the outbound transactions. 3 hours ago, exactly when Jamal dropped my father at the motel, a series of massive wire transfers had been executed. The money had been pushed through a labyrinth of domestic accounts, meant to obscure the final destination. They thought they were clever. Jamal probably watched a few YouTube videos about money laundering and thought he was a criminal mastermind. But to a trained forensic accountant, his digital footprints looked like a neon sign pointing directly to his guilt. He had used a fake power of attorney to authorize the transfers. I quickly captured screenshots, downloaded the routing numbers, and saved the entire transaction log to a secure encrypted cloud server. I had all the evidence I needed to prove they committed massive financial fraud and elder abuse. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It belonged to DeAndre. DeAndre was a 40-something no-nonsense estate attorney who had represented my father for 15 years. He was a brilliant African-American lawyer who treated our family like his own. He answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "DeAndre," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Jamal and Ashley just dumped Dad at an abandoned motel in the freezing rain. They drained $1.2 million from his personal and corporate accounts 3 hours ago. They are trying to steal the entire estate." DeAndre swore under his breath. "Is Elijah safe? Are you with him?" "I have him in my car," I replied. "He is freezing and I am taking him straight to the emergency room. But I need you to move right now. I want you to execute the ironclad protocol we set up last year. I need you to freeze every single asset associated with the business and his personal name." The ironclad protocol was a legal failsafe. DeAndre and I had secretly established when Jamal first started showing signs of financial desperation. It required an immediate emergency injunction from a judge to lock down all accounts and property deeds, pending a full investigation. "I have the routing numbers and the transfer logs," I continued. "I am emailing them to your secure server right now. They used a fraudulent power of attorney. I want their access revoked. I want the wire transfers halted and reversed before the banks open tomorrow morning. I want them penniless by sunrise. Consider it done," DeAndre said, his voice hard and professional. "Get your father to the hospital, Zuri. I will wake up the judge. By the time the sun comes up, Jamal and Ashley will not be able to buy a cup of coffee." I ended the call and looked over at my father. He was shivering in his sleep, still clutching the wooden recipe box to his chest. He had spent his whole life taking care of everyone else. Now it was my turn to take care of him. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the muddy parking lot, steering the heavy vehicle back onto the flooded highway, heading toward the nearest hospital. The rain continued to pour down, washing over the windshield in relentless waves. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm I was about to unleash on my brother. Ashley thought she was untouchable because of her privilege and her manipulation. Jamal thought he was a genius because he wore an expensive suit and talked a big game. They thought they could discard the man who gave them everything and walk away rich. But they forgot about the quiet sister who loved numbers. They forgot that numbers never lie and numbers never forget. By the time they finished their expensive wine and woke up in their comfortable bed tomorrow morning, their entire world would be shattered. The game was just beginning, and I held all the winning cards. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room buzzed continuously overhead, casting a sickly pale glow across the sterile white walls. I sat in a stiff plastic chair beside my father's hospital bed, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. The doctors had diagnosed him with mild pneumonia and severe exhaustion. They hooked him up to an intravenous drip of antibiotics and warm fluids to stabilize his frail body. I had not slept a single minute since I found him freezing outside that abandoned motel. My eyes were burning with fatigue, and my clothes were still damp from the heavy storm, but I completely refused to leave his side. I held his warm hand in mine, silently promising that the people who did this to him would pay dearly for their actions. The wall clock ticked loudly, marking the time as exactly 6 in the morning. The massive storm outside had finally broken, leaving behind flooded streets and gray morning skies. The emergency room was relatively quiet, save for the occasional beeping of medical monitors and the soft footsteps of nurses walking down the long corridor. My father was resting peacefully for the first time in many hours. His breathing was much more steady, and the rich, warm color had returned to his cheeks. The wooden recipe box that belonged to my late mother was safely tucked into my heavy leather tote bag, right next to my laptop and my confidential legal files. The heavy double doors of the emergency room swung open with a loud, violent bang that shattered the quiet morning atmosphere. I looked up and immediately felt my jaw clench with intense anger. Jamal and Ashley marched down the hallway looking as though they had just stepped off a high-fashion runway instead of entering a hospital. Jamal wore a custom-tailored navy blue suit and expensive Italian leather shoes that clicked sharply against the linoleum floor. Ashley was dressed in a pristine white trench coat, holding a designer handbag that cost more than most working people's monthly rent. They did not look like concerned family members rushing to check on a sick father. They looked like greedy predators arriving to claim a fresh, vulnerable kill. Ashley spotted me through the glass window of the room, and her face immediately twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated annoyance. She pushed the heavy door open and strutted inside, completely ignoring the fact that my father was sleeping soundly. She did not even glance at the heart monitor or ask a single question about his health condition. Instead, her eyes darted around the small, sterile room, scanning the countertops and the small plastic bin where the hospital nurses had carefully placed my father's personal belongings. She walked straight toward the bin and reached her manicured hands inside, frantically rummaging through his wet jacket and his brown leather wallet. She was desperately looking for his safety deposit box keys. She was looking for the physical access to the tangible assets she and Jamal had not yet managed to drain digitally through their fraudulent wire transfers. I stood up from my uncomfortable chair and physically placed myself directly between Ashley and the plastic belongings bin. I grabbed her wrist firmly but carefully, ensuring I did not use enough force to leave any kind of mark. I looked her dead in the eye and told her in a low, steady voice to step away from his things immediately. Ashley yanked her arm back quickly and glared at me with deep hostility. She looked me up and down slowly, taking in my damp, casual clothes and my natural box braids. She sneered and told me I was still looking completely unkempt as usual. She said I needed to back off and let the actual adults handle this complicated situation. She pointed an entitled finger at the door and told me to take my trash and go, because they were officially taking over the process now. I did not raise my voice at all. I did not give her the satisfaction of an emotional or angry reaction. I simply told her that if she touched my father's belongings one more time, I would have hospital security escort her out of the building in handcuffs. Jamal stepped forward, puffing out his chest and trying to use his physical size to intimidate me into submission. He told me to watch my mouth and remember who the true head of the family was. He said I was just a lowly, boring accountant who had absolutely no business interfering in his high-level corporate matters. Before our argument could escalate any further, the door opened and Dr. Harrison walked into the room holding a thick medical chart. He was a tall, stern-looking man who clearly did not tolerate nonsense or family drama in his busy hospital. He looked at Jamal and Ashley and asked who they were and why they were causing a disturbance. Jamal immediately smoothed the lapels of his suit jacket and put on his best charismatic fake smile. He introduced himself as Elijah's son and the chief executive officer of the family business enterprise. He introduced Ashley as his supportive wife. He then told the doctor that they were there to transfer my father to a different medical facility immediately. Dr. Harrison frowned deeply and looked down at the medical chart in his hands. He stated that my father was currently receiving intravenous antibiotics for pneumonia and was definitely not in any condition to be safely moved. He explained that a physical transfer right now could be highly dangerous and detrimental to his overall recovery process. Jamal waved his hand dismissively, ignoring the medical advice entirely. He said they had found a state-run nursing home on the outskirts of the city that was ready and willing to accept him today. He claimed the current hospital was far too expensive and they needed to consolidate family resources responsibly. It was a thinly veiled, disgusting lie. Jamal wanted to dump our father in a cheap, underfunded facility so he could keep more of the stolen money for his own lavish lifestyle. I did not care if the rough transfer put my father's fragile life at risk. He only cared about padding his own offshore bank accounts. Dr. Harrison crossed his arms firmly and stated that as the attending physician, he would not authorize a discharge unless it was explicitly approved by the designated legal medical proxy. Jamal smirked triumphantly and reached into the inner pocket of his expensive tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a folded legal document and slammed it aggressively onto the doctor's metal desk. He confidently declared that he held the medical and financial power of attorney. He said he was the sole proxy, and the doctor had to follow his legal orders to discharge the patient immediately without further delay. Ashley stood closely behind Jamal, with a highly smug expression plastered on her face. She looked at me and whispered maliciously that I had finally lost the game. She told me I was nothing but a minor temporary roadblock, and they were about to erase me from the family legacy entirely and permanently. I felt a deep, profound sense of calm wash over my entire body. I reached into my heavy leather tote bag, moving past my silver laptop and the wooden recipe box. I pulled out a thick, heavy document enclosed in a dark blue legal folder. It was stamped with the official raised seal of the state of North Carolina and notarized personally by DeAndre. I stepped forward confidently and placed it directly on top of Jamal's fraudulent paperwork. I looked at the doctor and told him to examine both documents extremely carefully. I explained that Jamal's power of attorney was signed exactly 1 month ago during a week when my father was hospitalized for a minor heart flutter and was heavily medicated with strong, confusing sedatives. I pointed out that the signature on Jamal's document was shaky, forced, and clearly written under duress. Then I tapped my own document with my index finger. I told Dr. Harrison that my paperwork was a durable, springing power of attorney. It was signed and notarized 2 entire years ago when my father was in perfect health and full mental capacity. I explained that my father and I had deliberately included a specific comprehensive psychological evaluation from a board-certified psychiatrist attached right there in the appendix, proving he was of completely sound mind when he signed it. But more importantly, I directed the doctor to carefully read Section 4, Paragraph 2 of my legal document. Dr. Harrison flipped open the blue folder and read the highlighted text aloud for everyone to hear. The clause stated explicitly that any future power of attorney document signed by Elijah would be considered legally void and completely invalid unless they were also countersigned by his daughter Zuri. Jamal's smug, confident smile vanished instantly from his face. The color rapidly drained from his cheeks as he stared at the heavy legal document resting on the desk. He realized in that exact horrifying moment that the piece of paper he had used to justify stealing the money and moving our father was entirely worthless. It had absolute zero legal standing. He had committed massive financial fraud based on a document that was legally void the exact second the ink dried on the page. Dr. Harrison looked up from the blue folder and handed Jamal's fake document back to him with a look of pure disdain. The doctor stated very clearly that my durable power of attorney completely superseded the newer fraudulent document. He told Jamal that I was the only person legally authorized to make medical decisions for the patient in this hospital. I then instructed Jamal and Ashley to step away from the patient and lower their voices immediately, or he would gladly call hospital security to have them forcefully removed from the emergency room. Ashley turned bright red with deep embarrassment and explosive fury. Her mask of white privilege and unearned superiority cracked completely into pieces. She glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, realizing that the quiet sisters she had underestimated and mocked for years had just completely outmaneuvered them both legally and strategically. She grabbed Jamal's arm roughly and told him they needed to leave right now because the hospital room smelled like cheap lotion and utter failure. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt at an insult from a highly arrogant woman who was rapidly about to lose absolutely everything she valued. The heavy glass doors of the hospital closed behind me as I stepped out into the crisp Sunday morning air. I had stayed by my father's side through the entire night, ensuring his condition remained stable and that no unwanted visitors could disturb his rest. Dr. Harrison assured me that the nursing staff would monitor him closely while I handled my necessary errands. I drove home quickly to shower and change into a tailored charcoal suit. My mind was sharp and completely focused on the next crucial step of my plan. I knew exactly where my brother would be today. First Baptist Church had been my family's spiritual home for 4 decades. My father helped fund the construction of the new fellowship hall when I was just a little girl. He was a deeply respected elder in the congregation, and his weekly attendance was a cornerstone of his life. Jamal knew this completely. He knew that to control the narrative, he had to control the congregation. I parked my car near the back of the crowded church parking lot. I took a deep breath and smoothed my suit jacket. It was time to face the community and tell the truth. I walked through the heavy wooden double doors of the sanctuary, just as the choir finished their opening hymn. The church was packed with hundreds of people dressed in their Sunday best. I slipped quietly into the very last row, sitting in the shadows, where no one would immediately notice my arrival. The air smelled of expensive perfume and polished wood. Up at the front of the magnificent room, sitting in the reserved VIP section, I saw Jamal and Ashley. They were dressed to the nines, playing their roles as the grieving and highly burdened leaders of the family unit. Jamal wore a custom-tailored gray suit that probably cost more than a reliable used car. Ashley sat beside him wearing a conservative but clearly designer dress, dabbing at her dry eyes with a pristine white tissue. She placed a comforting hand on Jamal's shoulder, rubbing it gently for everyone to see. It was a flawless theatrical performance designed to generate maximum sympathy from the unsuspecting crowd. Pastor Davis, a kind but aging man with a booming voice, stepped up to the wooden pulpit. He adjusted his glasses and looked out over the congregation with a very solemn facial expression. "Brothers and sisters," Pastor Davis began, his voice echoing through the large room. "Today we are lifting up prayers for a pillar of our community. Brother Elijah is currently battling severe health issues. His son Jamal has asked for a moment to share a brief update with the church family." Jamal stood up slowly, acting as though the weight of the entire world was pressing down on his shoulders. He walked up the steps to the pulpit with his head bowed. Ashley followed closely behind him, standing respectfully to the side, with her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Jamal gripped the edges of the wooden pulpit and looked out at the sea of concerned faces. He let out a long, trembling sigh. "Thank you, Pastor Davis," he said, his voice shaking with manufactured emotion. "It breaks my heart to stand before you today. As many of you know, my father has dedicated his entire life to serving this community through our soul food restaurants. But his health has declined rapidly in recent months. His mind is slipping away from us. It is a tragedy that has left our family completely devastated and struggling to find a path forward." I sat in the back row, feeling a cold wave of disgust wash over me. My father was exhausted and recovering from pneumonia, but his mind was perfectly sharp. Jamal was standing in the house of God, deliberately lying to hundreds of people who loved and respected our dad. The sad reality, Jamal continued, wiping a fake tear from his cheek, is that my father's illness has severely impacted the family business. The restaurants are failing. We are facing massive debts because of his outdated black business models. He refused to modernize, and now we are paying the heavy price. A shocked murmur rippled through the large congregation. People whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disbelief. Jamal was not just stealing money, he was actively destroying our father's hard-earned reputation to cover up his own financial crimes. Ashley stepped closer to Jamal and placed her hand on his back, playing the role of the supportive white savior. "Ashley and I have sacrificed everything," Jamal said, his voice growing louder. "We have drained our own personal savings to keep the business afloat and protect my father's legacy. We gave every last single dollar we own to this cause." I almost laughed out loud at the absolute absurdity of his statement. They had not sacrificed a single dime. They had stolen $1.2 million from my father's retirement account just last night. But the congregation did not know that yet. They looked at Jamal and Ashley with deep sympathy and admiration. "It is because of this massive financial burden," Jamal said, lowering his voice to a sorrowful whisper, "that we have had to make a painful and incredibly difficult decision. We simply cannot afford to keep the flagship soul food location open any longer today," he concluded. The congregation gasped audibly. The flagship restaurant was a historic landmark in our community. It was the place where people gathered after Sunday service, where birthdays were celebrated, and where my father hosted free Thanksgiving dinners for families in need. "You cannot sell the flagship location," an older woman in the third row called out. "It is the heart of our neighborhood." "I know it hurts," Jamal said, nodding sympathetically. "It hurts me more than anyone. But I have a fiduciary duty to save what is left of the company. I am signing a contract with developers early tomorrow morning." He claimed the developer would tear down the restaurant and build a luxury apartment complex. He said it was the only way to pay off the imaginary debts and afford my father's ongoing medical care. Ashley nodded sadly, wiping another's invisible tear from her cheek. People in the congregation began to turn in their seats, whispering angrily. A few of them spotted me sitting quietly in the back row. Their expressions shifted from sympathy for Jamal to harsh judgment directed solely at me. They believed I was the terrible estranged daughter, offering absolutely nothing to help my struggling family today. They thought I was just sitting idly by while my brave brother and his devoted wife carried the entire financial burden. I let them stare. I let them whisper. I waited until Jamal finished his pathetic speech, and the room fell into a heavy, mournful silence. Then I stood up. The sound of my heels clicking against the hardwood floor echoed loudly in the quiet sanctuary. I did not rush. I walked straight down the center aisle with my head held high and my posture perfectly straight. I carried a thick manila envelope grasped tightly in my own left hand. Every single eye in the building locked onto me as I marched toward the front of the church. Jamal saw me approaching, and his fake, sorrowful expression quickly morphed into genuine panic. He gripped the pulpit tightly, his knuckles turning stark white. Ashley took a nervous step backward, her eyes darting toward the side exit. I reached the front row and walked directly up the small wooden stairs to the raised platform. Pastor Davis looked at me with deep concern, clearly unsure of what was about to happen. I handed the heavy manila envelope directly into the pastor's wrinkled hands. Pastor Davis, I said, my voice projecting clearly without the need for a microphone. I apologize for interrupting the service, but there is something the congregation urgently needs to know. I turned to face my brother, who was sweating profusely under the bright church lights. That land does not belong to Jamal. I announced, my voice ringing out with absolute certainty. He has no legal right or authority to sell the flagship restaurant property to any corporate developer today. Jamal opened his mouth to argue, but no sound came out. I was completely trapped in his own miserable lying web. Last year, I continued turning back to address the sea of shocked faces in the pews. My father quietly transferred 40% of the equity in that specific commercial lot into the First Baptist Church Scholarship Fund. He wanted to ensure that the youth in our community would always have the financial resources they need to attend college. He did it anonymously because he never wanted praise or recognition for his profound charity. I pointed a firm, steady finger at my brother. Jamal is standing here today attempting to illegally sell property that rightfully belongs to this very church now. The silence in the sanctuary was instantly shattered by a massive eruption of pure outrage. The congregation exploded into angry shouts and loud, furious murmurs. The same people who had been weeping with sympathy for Jamal just 2 minutes ago were now glaring at him with intense, fierce hostility. Pastor Davis quickly opened the manila envelope and pulled out the certified legal documents. He read the deed of trust and the equity transfer agreements. His eyes widened in absolute shock as he verified that every single word I had just spoken was completely true and backed by undeniable legal evidence. This is entirely accurate, Pastor Davis announced into the microphone, his booming voice cutting through the angry chaos of the room. Brother Elijah gifted 40% of the flagship property to our Youth Scholarship Fund last November. We hold a legal stake in that land. Ashley visibly paled, her face turning the color of chalk. The performative supportive wife act dissolved instantly. She grabbed Jamal's arm roughly and yanked him toward the side stairs of the platform. "We need to leave right now," she hissed loudly enough for the front row to hear clearly. They scrambled awkwardly down the steps. I watched them flee toward the heavy wooden doors of the vestibule. The congregation continued to shout, demanding answers and accountability. I politely excused myself from the pastor and walked calmly down the aisle, following my brother and sister-in-law out of the sanctuary. I found them standing in the dimly lit vestibule, frantically pushing the exit doors open. Jamal spun around to face me, his chest heaving with explosive, manic rage. His expensive suit was wrinkled, and his charismatic facade was completely gone. He glared at me with a deep hatred that truly radiated from his entire body. "You think you won?" Jamal hissed, his voice a venomous whisper, as he stepped aggressively into my personal space. "You ruined that commercial sale today, but I do not even care. I still have $1.2 million in cash sitting right now in my bank accounts. Ashley and I are flying first class to Paris tonight. We are leaving this pathetic city behind forever. You can stay here and enjoy the massive corporate debt, sis." He smiled a nasty, cruel smile, thinking he had delivered the ultimate devastating blow. He thought he was still holding the winning hand. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or show a single ounce of fear or intimidation. I simply looked down at my silver wristwatch, checking the exact time. I looked back up at my brother and offered him a slow, knowing smile. "Are you entirely sure your credit cards still work, Jamal?" I asked softly. His cruel smile vanished, instantly replaced by a look of sheer terror as the reality of my words began to sink in. He realized he was dealing with a forensic accountant who tracked stolen money, and he was completely ruined right now. I left the church sanctuary and drove straight to my office in downtown Charlotte. The heavy glass doors of my accounting firm closed behind me, shutting out the noise of the city. My workspace was my absolute sanctuary. It was a secure room filled with 3 massive computer monitors and highly encrypted servers. I sat down in my leather ergonomic chair and woke up my main computer screen. The glowing graphs and lines of code stared back at me, waiting to be deciphered. I had promised my father that I would protect his legacy, and I fully intended to keep that promise today. Jamal thought he was a financial genius, but he was incredibly sloppy. He always left a digital trail behind him because he was too arrogant to cover his tracks properly. I opened the initial transaction logs from the night before. $1.2 million had been removed from the retirement accounts of my father. I needed to know exactly where every single penny went before the banks opened fully tomorrow morning. I cracked my knuckles and typed in my access credentials, initiating the deep dive forensic audit software I had custom built for situations exactly like this one. The software immediately began scrubbing through layers of dummy corporations and fake vendor invoices. Jamal had routed the stolen cash through 3 different shell companies registered in Delaware. It was a classic amateur money laundering technique designed to confuse standard banking algorithms. But my software was designed to slice through those exact specific layers. I watched the progress bar inch forward slowly on my central screen. The digital breadcrumbs were becoming more visible with each passing second. As I leaned in closer to examine a suspicious routing number, the heavy glass door of my private office suddenly swung open. I looked up in complete surprise. Ashley walked in wearing a perfectly tailored beige suit and carrying an expensive designer coffee cup. She closed the door firmly behind her and offered me a wide, fake smile that did not reach her cold eyes. She looked completely out of place in my world of data and logic. I stood up slowly, crossing my arms over my chest, and asked her how she got past the building security guards downstairs. She waved her hand dismissively and said she simply told them she was my supportive sister-in-law dropping by to visit. Ashley walked over to my polished mahogany desk and placed a thick white envelope right on top of my keyboard. She looked around the office, making sure we were completely alone before she spoke. She adopted a soft, condescending tone that she always used when trying to manipulate Black women in our community. She told me that Jamal was just being a hot-headed man and that we women needed to stick together and solve this quietly. She pointed to the white envelope and said it contained a certified bank check for $100,000. She told me I could finally buy some nice clothes and upgrade my boring life if I just took the money. All I had to do was drop the power of attorney dispute and walk away from the family estate forever. She leaned forward, resting her hands on my desk, and whispered that I should not try to fight them because they had the best corporate lawyers in the entire state of North Carolina. She claimed I would lose everything if I took this to court, and this generous financial offer was the absolute best deal I would ever get. I looked at the white envelope sitting on my desk, and then I looked directly into her calculating blue eyes. I did not raise my voice or show any outward signs of the intense anger boiling inside my chest. I calmly slid the envelope back across the polished wood until it fell right off the edge and hit the floor near her expensive shoes. I told Ashley that her fake display of sisterhood was incredibly insulting and completely transparent. I reminded her of the time Jamal stole $50,000 from my college tuition fund 10 years ago. I reminded her that she was the one who helped him forge the bank statements to cover up that exact theft so they could use my education money to pay for their lavish destination wedding. I told her I knew she was just as guilty and just as rotten as my brother. She gasped loudly and clutched her pearl necklace, feigning deep shock and profound offense at my harsh words. She tried to stammer out a pathetic denial, but I cut her off immediately and told her to pick up her dirty bribe money and leave my office right now. Ashley glared at me with absolute sheer hatred, dropping the sweet supportive sister act entirely. Her face flushed a deep, angry red as she bent down to retrieve the envelope from the floor. She pointed a manicured finger at my face and told me I was making the biggest mistake of my miserable life. She said Jamal was going to crush me in court and leave me utterly penniless. I simply smiled and told her she was severely overestimating her husband's intelligence and severely underestimating my dedication to my father. I picked up my desk phone and told her I was calling the security guards to escort her out of the building. She turned around abruptly and marched out of my office, slamming the heavy glass door so hard the walls vibrated. I watched her storm down the hallway until she disappeared into the elevator lobby. Her desperate attempt to buy me off proved one very important thing. They were terrified of what I might find. I sat back down in my leather chair and turned my attention back to the glowing monitors. The tracking software had finished compiling the data from the Delaware shell companies. I pulled up the detailed transaction logs and began following the money trail step by step. Jamal had set up the first shell company to look like a legitimate restaurant supply vendor. The $1.2 million had been transferred there, initially disguised as a massive bulk equipment purchase. From there, the money was quickly split into 3 separate offshore holding accounts located in the Cayman Islands. I typed furiously, running complex decryption algorithms to pierce the veil of corporate secrecy surrounding those specific offshore accounts. I fully expected to find the funds sitting in a hidden account registered under the name of my brother. I fully anticipated that Jamal was planning to use this stolen fortune to pay off his massive gambling debts and fund his luxurious fake lifestyle. But as the final layers of encryption fell away, and the true ownership records populated on my screen, I froze completely. The data staring back at me did not make any sense at first glance. The tracing software highlighted a massive glaring anomaly in the financial routing pattern. The money had not stayed with Jamal at all. It had been moved again just 1 hour ago to a totally different international bank. My eyes scanned the new destination routing numbers with intense focused concentration. The entire sum of $1.2 million had been consolidated back into a single massive transfer. It was routed through a highly secure encrypted gateway directly into a private banking institution located in Geneva, Switzerland. I quickly accessed international banking registries to identify the primary account holder. I cross-referenced the account identification numbers with global tax records and property deeds. The result flashed onto my central monitor in bright red text. The private Swiss bank account was not a joint marital asset. It was not registered to Jamal in any capacity whatsoever. The account was registered solely and exclusively under the maiden name of Ashley. My brother, the arrogant golden child, who thought he was a master manipulator, had just been completely outsmarted and robbed by his own wife. Ashley had used him as a convenient dumb pawn to steal the money from my father, and then she had immediately stolen it from him. The realization hit me like a bolt of lightning, illuminating the entire dark scope of her treacherous, greedy plan. She was not trying to save their marriage today with that pathetic fake bribe. She was trying to buy time so her final international wire transfer could clear the European banking regulations without being flagged for suspicious activity. I immediately opened a new window and hacked into the public airline flight databases using my forensic clearance credentials. I ran a search for any recent bookings under the name of Ashley or her known aliases. The search results populated in less than 10 seconds, confirming my worst suspicions. Ashley had purchased a premium first-class ticket on a direct flight from Charlotte to Paris, departing at exactly 5 o'clock this evening. She had only purchased one single ticket. There was absolutely no reservation made for Jamal. She was planning to abandon her husband to face the devastating legal consequences of the massive financial fraud while she escaped to Europe with the entire fortune of my father. I sat back in my chair, letting the sheer magnitude of her wicked betrayal sink in. Jamal was a terrible, greedy person who deserved to be punished for hurting our father, but the supreme coldness of Ashley's betrayal was almost fascinating to witness. She had played the supportive, tearful wife at the church perfectly today to distract him from her theft. She had stroked his ego and fueled his resentment toward me, all while secretly orchestrating his total, absolute downfall. I quickly initiated the ironclad protocol overrides directly through the federal banking portal, linking my durable power of attorney to the stolen funds. I submitted the emergency legal injunction, provided by DeAndre, directly to the Swiss banking authorities, flagging the $1.2 million transfer as the direct result of confirmed elder abuse and international wire fraud. The system processed my request, and within moments, a bright green confirmation message appeared on my screen. The Swiss account was successfully frozen, pending a full international federal investigation. Ashley would not be able to withdraw a single penny when she landed in Paris. She was currently packing her designer bags, completely oblivious to the fact that her stolen fortune was locked tight. I printed out the entire physical dossier of the money trail, the shell companies, the Swiss account registration, and the solo flight itinerary. I placed the thick stack of papers into a secure black folder. My brother was currently hosting a lavish lunch at an exclusive country club with a corrupt corporate developer trying to sell the restaurant properties using forged real estate deeds. He foolishly believed he was still in total control of the family empire. He believed he was about to secure another massive payout to fund his luxurious life. I grabbed my car keys and my leather tote bag, feeling a deep, powerful surge of righteous determination. I was going to walk right into that country club and drop this explosive dossier directly onto his table. I was going to show Jamal exactly what his precious, loyal wife had done to him behind his back. I was going to watch his arrogant, smug face shatter into a million tiny pieces when he realized he was going to prison for a woman who was actively abandoning him. The storm outside had passed, leaving the streets of Charlotte washed clean and bright under the afternoon sun. I drove toward the country club with perfect clarity. They had completely underestimated me for far too long. It was time to end this game right now. I left my secure office and walked out into the bright afternoon sun, feeling a deep sense of purpose radiating through my entire body. I climbed into my vehicle and placed the heavy black folder carefully on the passenger seat right next to my purse. That folder was a weapon of mass financial destruction. It contained every single piece of evidence I needed to dismantle my brother's fraudulent corporate transaction today. Jamal honestly thought he was a mastermind who could easily outsmart his boring, quiet sister. He had absolutely no idea that he was walking blindly into a trap of his own making. I started the engine and merged onto the busy downtown streets, heading directly toward the exclusive country club. This specific club was a bastion of old Southern wealth. It was an incredibly restricted golf club where the initiation fees alone cost more than what my father earned during his first 10 hard years of running his restaurant business. My father never cared for places like this. He preferred the community church and the bustling kitchens of his soul food empire. But Jamal absolutely loved this country club. He loved rubbing shoulders with wealthy elite corporate men who wore pastel polo shirts and drank overpriced imported scotch. I desperately wanted their validation. He foolishly thought that sitting in their lavish dining room eating their expensive food made him their equal. He did not realize they only saw him as a convenient target for exploitation. I turned my vehicle onto the long, winding road that led up to the main clubhouse. The landscaping was impeccably manicured with vibrant green lawns and ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. I pulled up to the valet stand and put my car in park. A young man in a crisp white uniform immediately approached my window. I handed him my keys, grabbed the thick black folder, and walked toward the grand entrance. The heavy oak double doors of the country club swung open smoothly as I approached. The main lobby was vast and intimidating, lined with dark wood paneling and vintage oil portraits of wealthy men who had founded the establishment decades ago. The air inside smelled strongly of expensive cigars, leather furniture, and fresh lilies. I walked straight past the grand reception desk, completely ignoring the questioning look of the older hostess. I knew exactly where the private dining rooms were located because I had researched the club floor plan on my phone before leaving the office. My flat black professional shoes made absolutely no sound against the thick plush oriental carpet. I was a phantom moving silently through their exclusive private world. I reached the wide entrance of the main dining hall. It was a massive, elegant room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pristine 18th hole of the championship golf course. The tables were covered in crisp white linen adorned with fine crystal glasses and heavy silver cutlery. I paused at the entrance and scanned the busy room. I spotted him almost immediately. Jamal was sitting at a prime corner table laughing loudly at something his companion had just said. He was wearing a light gray custom-tailored suit that he had undoubtedly purchased using high-interest credit cards. Sitting directly across from him was a tall, balding white man in a sharp navy blazer and a silk tie. This was the corporate developer. This was the ruthless shark who was trying to buy our entire family legacy for absolute pennies on the dollar. They were dining on extremely expensive Wagyu steaks and drinking a bottle of imported red wine that likely cost a small fortune. They looked like two successful businessmen closing a totally legitimate deal. It made my stomach turn. I took a slow, deep breath to steady my heart rate. I walked slowly and deliberately across the crowded dining room. I did not rush or show any outward signs of anger or emotional distress. I maintained perfect professional composure because forensic accountants do not rely on emotion. We rely on indisputable facts. As I approached their corner table, Jamal happened to look up from his plate. His loud, arrogant laugh died instantly in his throat. His handsome face dropped into an expression of pure, unadulterated shock and deep annoyance. He quickly tried to recover his shattered composure by leaning forward to whisper something urgent to the developer. He was probably warning the man that his crazy, estranged sister was approaching the table to cause a scene. The corporate developer turned his head and looked at me with mild, condescending amusement. Jamal stood up quickly, pushing his chair back and physically blocking my path to the table. He lowered his voice to a harsh, aggressive hiss and told me I was trespassing on private property. He said I needed to turn around and walk out the front door immediately before he called security to drag me out of the building by my hair. I looked at my brother and felt absolutely nothing but cold pity. I told him in a very calm, flat voice that I was not going anywhere until I delivered some highly important financial documents. A large security guard in a dark suit had noticed the tense interaction from across the room and began walking briskly toward our table. Jamal immediately flagged the guard down, pointing an angry, shaking finger directly at my face. He told the security guard that I was an uninvited, unhinged guest who was harassing his extremely important business meeting. He loudly demanded that I be removed from the dining room premises immediately. The heavy-set security guard stepped forward and reached out his large hand to grab my arm. I stepped back smoothly, avoiding his grasp, and looked the guard directly in the eyes. I spoke in a clear, highly authoritative tone that carried easily across the quiet dining room. I told the guard that if he laid a single finger on me, I would file a massive civil lawsuit against this country club for physical assault and battery. I stated very clearly that I was an official forensic accountant, simply delivering legal paperwork regarding an ongoing active federal investigation. The sudden mention of an active federal investigation made the large security guard hesitate immediately. He dropped his hand to his side and looked at Jamal, unsure of what he should do next. I used that brief, crucial moment of hesitation to step neatly around my brother and approach the edge of the dining table. I looked down at the balding corporate developer, who was staring at me with growing irritation and impatience. He told me in a very arrogant tone that this was a private business lunch, and I was rudely interrupting a multi-million-dollar real estate transaction. I did not say a single word to him at first. I simply raised the thick black folder high in the air and dropped it directly onto the dead center of his pristine white dining plate. The heavy 50-page dossier landed with a loud, dramatic thud, splashing dark, savory steak sauce onto the crisp white tablecloth and nearly knocking over his expensive crystal wine glass. Jamal gasped in absolute horror and lunged forward frantically, trying to snatch the black folder off the table. I slapped his hand away hard and told him to sit down and keep his mouth shut because the adults were talking now. I turned my full, undivided attention to the wealthy corporate developer. I introduced myself formally and professionally. I told him my name was Zuri, and I was a certified forensic accountant, representing the true legal owner of the soul food restaurant chain. I watched his narrow eyes widen slightly as he tried to process this unexpected information. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off instantly. I told him to open the black folder and read the very first page before he made any more stupid illegal decisions today. The developer hesitated for a second, but his self-preservation instincts won out. He reached out with thick, manicured fingers and flipped open the black cover. His eyes scanned the top document and the healthy pink color began to drain rapidly from his face. I decided to read the contents of the document out loud, so my arrogant brother could hear exactly who he was attempting to do business with today. I stated clearly that the developer sitting at this prestigious table was not a legitimate commercial real estate investor at all. I explained that his primary corporation was currently the main target of a massive federal racketeering and corruption probe. I did not stop there. I listed off the 3 specific offshore shell companies he routinely used to funnel dirty money through local commercial real estate purchases in the state of North Carolina. I recited the exact international routing numbers and the full legal names of his corrupt business partners who had already been indicted by the federal government just last month. Jamal stared at me in total absolute disbelief. His mouth hung open slightly. He looked from me to the developer, waiting desperately for the older man to deny these outrageous claims and kick me out. But the developer said absolutely nothing. He was sweating profusely now, a thick bead of moisture rolling down his temple. I leaned over the table, placing both of my hands firmly on the wood surface, and looked deep into the developer's panicked eyes. I told him that the commercial real estate deeds Jamal was offering him today were entirely forged and legally void. I explained that the true legal owner of the property, my father, had placed all of his diverse assets into an irrevocable trust, which I controlled exclusively as the sole trustee. I told the developer that if he signed those forged transfer documents today with Jamal, he would not just be committing basic real estate fraud. He would be committing severe federal money laundering and conspiracy to defraud a protected family trust. I promised him, looking him dead in the eye, that if his expensive ink pen touched that paper, I would personally hand-deliver this comprehensive 50-page financial dossier directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation agents who were already actively building a racketeering case against him. I told him I would make absolutely sure he spent the next 20 years of his miserable life rotting in a federal penitentiary. The developer did not even try to defend himself or his reputation. I knew he was completely caught. He knew that a skilled forensic accountant who had successfully tracked his deeply hidden shell companies could easily destroy his entire carefully constructed life in a matter of hours. He grabbed his personal cell phone from the table, leaving his expensive leather briefcase sitting on the floor. He stood up so incredibly fast that his heavy wooden dining chair tipped over backward and crashed loudly onto the polished hardwood floor. He did not say a single word to Jamal. He did not offer an apology or an explanation. He simply turned around and practically sprinted out of the elegant dining room, pushing forcefully past the highly confused waiters and the bewildered security guard. He completely abandoned the lavish lunch, the forged real estate contract, and his supposed business partner in a matter of seconds. Jamal stood frozen by the table, staring blankly at the empty space where his wealthy corporate buyer had been sitting just moments ago. The entire busy dining room had gone completely silent. Dozens of wealthy country club members were staring openly at my brother, whispering behind their hands and shaking their heads. His grand, magnificent illusion of being a powerful, respected businessman was entirely shattered in front of the exact elite audience he desperately wanted to impress the most. He was thoroughly exposed as a fraud. He looked down at the black folder covered in spilled steak sauce, and then he looked slowly up at me. His handsome face was twisted into a horrific mask of pure, ugly hatred. His chest heaved up and down as he struggled to process the sheer magnitude of his total defeat. He realized in that agonizing moment that I had permanently ruined his multi-million-dollar payout. He realized his fake power of attorney was completely useless. He realized his buyer was a terrified criminal who had just abandoned him to face the music alone. But Jamal was exactly like a cornered wild animal. He needed to strike out and cause maximum pain simply because he was in profound pain himself. He stepped closer to me, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He was shaking with violent, uncontrollable rage. He told me I thought I was so incredibly smart. He said I might have protected the restaurants today, but he still had total physical control over our father's primary residence. He screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice echoing wildly across the silent country club dining room that he still had the physical keys to the family house. He told me with a vicious, cruel smile that he had already hired a cheap, ruthless junk removal crew early this morning. He said they were currently at the estate ripping everything apart room by room. He promised me that by the time I drove across town, every single one of our father's precious belongings would be gone. He specifically mentioned all of our late mother's irreplaceable family heirlooms, including her wedding dress, and the photo albums documenting our family history during the civil rights movement. He said they were all being thrown into a filthy metal dumpster right now and hauled away to the city landfill forever to be destroyed. He laughed a dark, hollow sound that chilled my blood and stormed out of the dining room, leaving me standing alone next to the ruined table, knowing I had to race against time to save our family history from being erased. I ran out of the country club lobby and threw myself into the driver's seat of my vehicle, with my heart hammering against my ribs. Jamal had made it clear that his cruelty knew no bounds. He was willing to destroy our late mother's sacred legacy, simply to punish me for exposing his corporate crimes. I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal and tore out of the parking lot, leaving deep tire tracks in the wet gravel. The drive across Charlotte was a frantic blur of speed limits and adrenaline. The city was still recovering from the midnight floodwaters, with utility trucks clearing fallen oak branches and emergency crews pumping out flooded underpasses. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every slow-moving car felt like an obstacle designed to steal precious seconds from my father's heritage. My father had purchased the family home on Oak Ridge Lane 35 years ago. It was a stately two-story brick house, sitting on a hill surrounded by dogwood trees and azaleas. It was the house where my mother had cooked Sunday dinners for the entire neighborhood. It was the house where the walls held pencil markings measuring how tall Jamal and I grew each summer. Every piece of antique oak furniture in that living room had been selected by my mother before she passed away. To Jamal and Ashley, those items were just dusty old junk standing in the way of a quick real estate flip. But to my father and me, they were the physical embodiment of our family history. I turned onto Oak Ridge Lane and immediately saw the massive steel dumpster parked crookedly on the front lawn. The heavy truck tires had already torn deep, muddy ruts through the manicured grass my father spent decades tending. 3 men in soiled work shirts were hauling a solid mahogany credenza down the front steps. As I watched, they lost their grip and dropped the antique piece onto the stone walkway, splintering the hand-carved legs into pieces. A sickening wave of nausea hit my stomach. I slammed the brakes and parked my SUV across the driveway, blocking the exit for the junk removal truck. I leaped out of the car, leaving the door wide open. Standing on the wide wraparound front porch was Ashley. She looked completely relaxed and utterly unfazed by the destruction happening around her. She was wearing oversized designer sunglasses and holding an iced coffee in one manicured hand. With her other hand, she was carelessly tossing old photo albums into a plastic garbage bin. These were the leather-bound albums containing the only existing photographs of my grandparents marching during the civil rights movement. I charged up the stone steps 2 at a time, screaming for the workers to stop immediately. The 3 men paused, looking startled by my sudden arrival. Ashley slowly lowered her sunglasses and looked at me with a smirk of pure malicious amusement. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her straw and asked me what took me so long. She claimed she was just finishing up some much-needed spring cleaning before the open house tomorrow. I walked straight up to the front door and planted my feet firmly across the threshold. I placed both hands on the doorframe, physically blocking the entrance to my childhood home. I turned to the 3 movers and told them in a loud, commanding voice that this property was currently under active federal litigation. I told them that if they carried one more item out of this house, they would be named as co-conspirators in an elder abuse and grand larceny investigation. The men looked at each other nervously and set down the heavy antique mirror they were carrying. Ashley stepped forward, her face flushing with immediate annoyance. She told the workers to ignore me and get back to work. She claimed she was the homeowner and she was paying them by the hour to clear the entire property. She said I was just a bitter, jealous relative who had no legal authority here. I did not move an inch. I looked at the lead worker and showed him my official forensic accounting badge along with the legal business card of our estate attorney, DeAndre. I told the man that my father was the sole registered owner of this property and he was currently hospitalized. I explained that removing property without the owner's written consent was a Class C felony under North Carolina state law. The lead worker wiped his forehead with the back of his dirty glove and stepped back toward the truck, telling Ashley that they were taking a break until the legal situation was sorted out. Ashley was absolutely furious that her hired help was refusing to follow her orders. She turned her venomous gaze onto me, stepping so close I could smell the expensive lavender perfume masking her rotten intentions. She poked a sharp acrylic fingernail directly into the center of my chest. She told me that Jamal had transferred the deed of the house into her private corporate LLC early this morning. She said this was her house now, and she had the right to burn every single piece of furniture to the ground if she felt like it. She sneered that my mother's old things smelled like grease and cheap soul food, just like the rest of our family. I grabbed her wrist firmly and pushed her finger away from my chest. I warned her never to touch me again and never to speak of my mother in that tone. Ashley let out a dramatic theatrical shriek, as if I had physically attacked her with a weapon. She stumbled backward onto the porch wicker furniture, making sure the movers could see her exaggerated distress. She pulled her gold smartphone from her designer pocket and immediately dialed 911. She pressed the phone to her ear and began breathing heavily into the receiver. When the emergency dispatcher answered, Ashley's voice instantly transformed into the terrified, trembling voice of a defenseless victim. She screamed into the phone that an aggressive, hostile black woman had broken into her home and was physically assaulting her on the front porch. She gave the operator our address and pleaded for immediate armed police assistance, claiming she feared for her life and the safety of her property. I stood in the doorway and watched her performative routine with cold disgust. This was the classic weaponization of privilege that people like Ashley used whenever they were caught in their own lies. She thought that crying fake tears to the police would instantly intimidate me into running away. She thought the system would automatically take her side against a black woman standing on a porch. But she forgot that I dealt with law enforcement protocols and legal documentation every single day of my professional career. Within 4 minutes, the loud, shrill wail of police sirens echoed down Oak Ridge Lane. 2 patrol cruisers sped around the corner and pulled violently onto the curb, their red and blue lights flashing against the brick facade of the house. 2 uniformed officers stepped out of their vehicles with their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. Ashley immediately rushed down the porch steps, stumbling dramatically as she approached the officers. She threw her hands over her face and began sobbing uncontrollably. She pointed a trembling finger at me standing on the porch. She told the officers that the wall and threatened to burn the house down because I was jealous of her marriage to Jamal. She begged the officers to arrest me immediately and have me removed from the premises so her moving crew could finish their work in peace. The older officer, a veteran sergeant with gray hair and a stern expression, looked up at me and told me to keep my hands visible and step slowly down the stairs. I did not panic. I did not make any sudden movements or raise my voice. I walked down the stone steps with my hands open at my sides, maintaining a calm, professional posture. I addressed the sergeant with absolute respect. I told him my name was Zuri, and that this property was the primary residence of my father Elijah, who had lived here for over 3 decades. I informed the officers that my father had been abandoned in a freezing flood the night before by the woman standing before them, and was currently recovering from pneumonia at Charlotte Memorial Hospital. Ashley interrupted, shouting that I was lying, and that the officers needed to put me in handcuffs immediately. The sergeant held up his hand firmly, telling Ashley to remain quiet while he conducted his investigation. I opened my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick bound folder with a clear plastic cover. I handed it directly to the sergeant. I told him that as a certified forensic accountant, I strongly suggested he have his dispatch officer run the property tax parcel number on his vehicle computer right now. I directed his attention to the certified court-stamped documents inside the folder. I explained that 3 years ago, my father placed this entire residence, along with all of his commercial real estate holdings, into the Elijah Legacy Irrevocable Trust. I showed the sergeant the notarized trust agreement, proving that I was named as the sole designated trustee with exclusive fiduciary authority over the physical property and all personal contents inside. I pointed out that the trust explicitly stated that the house could never be sold, transferred, or altered without my direct written authorization and countersignature. I turned and pointed to the steel dumpster and the shattered mahogany furniture on the lawn. I stated very clearly for the official police record that Ashley was currently committing felony criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and malicious destruction of protected trust property. I formally requested that the officers remove her from the property immediately and issue a formal trespass warning. The sergeant read through the legal trust documents, carefully noting the official gold seal of the North Carolina Probate Court. He walked back to his patrol car and spoke into his radio, cross-referencing the county tax registry on his dashboard terminal. After 2 tense minutes, he stepped out of his cruiser and walked back toward the porch, his expression completely changed. The sergeant looked directly at Ashley. He told her that according to the official county records, the property was indeed owned entirely by the Elijah Legacy Irrevocable Trust, with Zuri listed as the active trustee. He ordered the junk removal crew to immediately cease all operations and begin unloading every single item from the dumpster back onto the porch. He then turned to Ashley and told her in a very firm tone that she had no legal authority to remove any personal belongings from this house, and that she needed to step off the porch and vacate the driveway immediately. Ashley's face twisted into a mask of pure, unbridled panic. Her weaponized tears dried up, instantly replaced by the raw, desperate fury of a cornered criminal. She realized that her scheme to erase our family history and steal the house was falling apart in broad daylight in front of the neighbors, who were now watching from their front yards. "Wait!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysterical energy. "You do not understand. That old trust is completely irrelevant now." She lunged forward and unzipped the side compartment of her designer leather handbag. She pulled out a crisp, freshly printed legal document and shoved it aggressively into the sergeant's chest. "This is a brand new deed of trust," Ashley yelled, waving the paper wildly. "Your father signed this house over to me and Jamal as a personal gift just yesterday afternoon. It has been filed and recorded with the city register. I am the legal owner of this home now." The sergeant took the document and adjusted his glasses, scanning the text. He turned the page and looked at the bottom, where a black ink signature reading Elijah was clearly visible alongside an official notary public digital stamp dated yesterday. The sergeant let out a heavy breath and rubbed the back of his neck. He looked at me with an apologetic expression that sent a cold shudder down my spine. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, holding up both documents, "you have an irrevocable trust document from 3 years ago, but she is holding a newly recorded deed signed and notarized yesterday. Under state law, the police cannot determine the validity of conflicting deeds on the scene. This is a civil real estate dispute that has to be decided by an emergency judge in probate court. Until a judge issues an injunction or rules on this deed, my hands are legally tied. I cannot force her to leave, and I cannot let you lock her out." Ashley heard the officer's words, and a sickening, triumphant smile spread slowly across her face. She looked at me over the sergeant's shoulder, her eyes gleaming with wicked arrogance. She adjusted her sunglasses and whispered that I was too late because the house belonged to her now. I stood on the front lawn watching Ashley smile her wicked, arrogant smile from the top of the porch stairs. The veteran police sergeant had just told me his hands were completely tied until a civil court judge could review her newly printed deed of trust. I knew arguing with the officers would only make me look like the aggressive, angry woman Ashley desperately wanted me to be. I took a slow, deep breath to steady my racing heart. I calmly thanked the sergeant for his time and turned my back on my childhood home. I walked to my vehicle. I opened the heavy door of my vehicle and climbed inside, shutting out the chaotic noise of the busy street. I watched through the windshield as the junk removal crew slowly began moving my father's antique furniture back onto the front porch. Ashley was pacing back and forth, barking angry orders at the tired workers while clutching her fraudulent piece of paper. She honestly believed she had outsmarted me today. She thought that producing a fake document at the last possible second was a stroke of absolute brilliance. I started my engine and pulled away from the curb very quickly. I drove straight toward downtown Charlotte, keeping my eyes focused on the busy road ahead. My mind was racing through every single possible legal loophole and financial strategy. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the direct line for our trusted estate attorney, DeAndre. He answered on the very first ring, his voice sounding tense and highly alert. I told him exactly what had just happened on the front porch of the family estate. I explained that Ashley had somehow produced a newly recorded deed of trust bearing my father's signature and a digital notary public authorization stamp today. DeAndre let out a long, heavy sigh over the phone and told me this complication was incredibly dangerous. He explained that a newly recorded deed would temporarily freeze my ability to protect the physical property from a fast cash sale. He warned me that Ashley and Jamal could easily auction the beautiful estate to a network of shady real estate investors within the next 12 hours. They would take the cash and disappear before any probate judge could even open the case file. I told DeAndre I was exactly 10 minutes away from his law office and hung up abruptly. I arrived at his prestigious law firm and walked briskly through the elegant reception area. DeAndre was already waiting for me inside his private glass-walled conference room. He had multiple heavy law books opened across the large mahogany table. His paralegal had already pulled a digital copy of Ashley's new deed from the county public records database. I sat down in a plush leather chair and stared intently at the printed document resting on the polished wood surface. The single piece of white paper looked incredibly authentic and completely terrifying. It threatened to erase my father's legacy entirely today. DeAndre pointed his silver pen at the bottom of the printed page. He told me he had analyzed the document carefully, and it was a spectacular forgery. He said the formatting matched state guidelines perfectly, and the legal language was absolutely flawless. He zoomed in on the signature at the bottom of the page. It looked exactly like my father's distinctive flowing handwriting. DeAndre rubbed his tired eyes and admitted that fighting this document in a standard civil court could take months or even several years. He said the signature alone would require expensive handwriting experts and endless legal depositions. I leaned forward and scrutinized the black ink signature on the glowing computer screen. DeAndre was right about the visual perfection of the forged name, but forensic accountants do not rely solely on visual evidence. We dig much deeper into the invisible digital architecture that supports the transaction. I told DeAndre to stop focusing on the handwritten name and look directly at the digital notary stamp placed right next to it. The electronic seal belonged to a licensed state notary public and displayed a highly specific transaction serial number, along with a precise timestamp from yesterday late afternoon hours precisely. I pulled my laptop from my tote bag and connected it to the secure wireless network in the conference room. I told DeAndre that people who commit fraud always focus their entirely misguided efforts on making the front of the document look perfect. They spend hours tracing signatures and copying legal jargon, but they always forget about the metadata. A sudden vivid memory from our shared childhood flashed into my active mind. I remembered when my arrogant brother Jamal was a struggling freshman in college, taking a basic introductory business course. He was constantly looking for easy, cheap, illegal shortcuts. Jamal had stolen a brilliant term paper from a very smart, hardworking classmate and submitted it as his own original work. He thought he was an absolute genius because he changed the font style and replaced the name at the top of the title page. He strutted around the house bragging about his guaranteed high grade. But the strict university professor failed him immediately and placed him on academic probation. Jamal had completely forgotten to clear the digital author properties buried deep inside the document properties menu. He left the original creator's digital fingerprint permanently embedded in the computer file. I smiled coldly at the memory, because my foolish brother had clearly not learned a single lesson from his past embarrassing mistakes. I explained to DeAndre that electronic notary stamps are not just static images placed on a piece of paper. They are complex digital signatures that record a massive amount of invisible background data, including the exact Internet Protocol address of the computer that requested and finalized the stamp. I opened my specialized forensic tracking software and typed in the unique transaction serial number listed on Ashley's fake deed of trust. The computer processor hummed very quietly while working. DeAndre watched over my shoulder with intense growing fascination as lines of green tracking code cascaded rapidly down my dark computer screen. I was bypassing the standard public records portal and accessing the secure back-end registry of the state electronic notary system. Because I was a licensed forensic investigator evaluating a case of suspected elder abuse, I had the legal authority to pull the unredacted digital logs. I hit the final execution key and waited for the official server to return the detailed background information securely. The results populated on my screen in less than 15 tense, silent, quiet seconds. I pointed my index finger at the brightly illuminated data grid and let out a short, sharp laugh of pure disbelief. Ashley was just as sloppy and arrogant as her husband. The digital log showed that the electronic notary stamp had indeed been applied yesterday at exactly 4:30 in the afternoon. I looked up at DeAndre and reminded him where my father was at that precise moment in time. DeAndre slammed his hand onto the mahogany table and declared that Elijah was heavily sedated in the hospital intensive care unit, being actively treated for his severe deadly chest pneumonia. It was physically and medically impossible for my father to have authorized a digital real estate transfer from a hospital bed while unconscious. But the timestamp was only the first beautiful piece of this devastating puzzle. I highlighted the next row of detailed information showing the specific Internet Protocol address of the computer terminal that executed the final fraudulent notarization. I ran that unique string of numbers through a rapid geolocation tracing program. The system instantly mapped the physical location of the computer network, identifying the exact building where the massive federal crime had just been successfully, quietly, ruthlessly committed. The location was not a hospital room, and it was not a legitimate law office. The address belonged to a boutique commercial real estate agency located in the wealthy suburbs of Charlotte. It was the exact same agency where Ashley had worked as a junior broker before she married my brother and decided she was too rich and important to hold down a real job. She had clearly used her old professional connections and retained unauthorized access to her former employer's secure digital notary portal. She abused the state system to bypass the mandatory pressing need for a physical witness. DeAndre let out a low whistle of profound professional respect. He told me that I had just uncovered a slam-dunk textbook case of felony forgery and federal wire fraud. He explained that by transmitting a fraudulent property deed across state digital servers, Ashley had elevated a simple local crime into a massive federal offense. The potential prison sentence for this specific combination of illegal acts was incredibly severely, devastatingly long. I looked at the undeniable digital evidence glowing on my screen and felt a powerful surge of righteous vindication. They thought they could steal my father's legacy completely today. I printed 3 crisp physical copies of the geolocation data and the corresponding medical timeline showing my father's incapacitated state. I arranged them neatly inside my thick black leather portfolio. The evidence was absolutely flawless and completely irrefutable, but we still had one massive immediate problem to solve perfectly. I checked the silver watch on my left wrist. It was currently 1 in the afternoon. Ashley had a confirmed solo first-class ticket on a direct international flight to Paris, departing at exactly 5 this evening. We had less than 4 hours to stop her from leaving the entire country. If Ashley managed to board that airplane before the federal authorities could process our evidence and issue an official arrest warrant, she would vanish into Europe. She would disappear completely, leaving Jamal to face the devastating legal consequences alone, while she enjoyed the stolen wealth hidden securely in her private Swiss bank account. I needed to trap them both in the exact same room and hold them there until the federal agents could arrive and put them in heavy steel handcuffs. I needed to execute the final brilliant phase of my operation with absolute perfect flawless precision right here today. I looked at DeAndre and asked him where Jamal was supposed to be this afternoon. DeAndre checked his digital calendar and smiled a very dangerous knowing smile. He told me that Jamal had scheduled an emergency executive board meeting at the Soul Food corporate headquarters at 3 o'clock. Jamal had called all the senior regional managers to the main office, claiming he was going to announce a massive, lucrative restructuring plan. He was planning to illegally liquidate the main company accounts, empty the employee payroll funds, and announce his fake triumphant sale of the entire commercial property portfolio abruptly. Jamal wanted to gather everyone in a room and gloat about his magnificent fake business prowess one last time before he took the money and ran. He foolishly expected Ashley to be standing right by his side, playing the role of the devoted, supportive, wealthy wife. He had absolutely no idea that she was secretly planning to head straight to the international airport immediately after the board meeting concluded. The sheer spectacular arrogance of my brother was truly his greatest, most fatal absolute weakness. He always needed an audience to witness his fake greatness and stroke his deeply fragile ego. I stood up from the plush leather chair and closed my laptop with a firm, decisive click. I slid the computer and the printed evidence securely into my heavy leather tote bag. I looked at DeAndre and told him to contact his connections at the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service immediately. I instructed him to tell the federal agents to meet me at the corporate headquarters in exactly 2 precise hours. I was going to walk into that crowded executive boardroom and personally deliver the most explosive financial presentation my arrogant brother had ever seen today. I left the law office of DeAndre and drove straight toward the Soul Food corporate headquarters. The massive glass and steel building stood in the center of the downtown business district. My father had purchased this entire office complex 10 years ago when his restaurant chain expanded across state lines. He built this empire from scratch, pouring his blood, sweat, and tears into every single brick-and-mortar location. Now my arrogant brother was sitting up in the executive boardroom, preparing to burn it all down to the ground. Jamal had called an emergency meeting with all the regional managers and senior staff. He wanted to liquidate the company accounts and empty the employee payroll before the federal authorities could catch him. He thought he was untouchable today. I pulled my vehicle into the private underground parking garage and parked directly next to Jamal's leased red sports car. I grabbed my heavy leather tote bag containing my laptop and the physical copies of the financial evidence. I walked toward the private executive elevator with absolute clarity of purpose. I was not just a sister anymore. I was the designated protector of my father's grand legacy. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor of the corporate headquarters. The reception area was completely empty because all the staff had been ordered to attend Jamal's mandatory emergency meeting. The thick plush carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps as I walked down the long hallway toward the main executive boardroom. I could hear Jamal's loud, booming voice echoing through the heavy oak doors. He was giving one of his classic charismatic speeches. He was using big corporate buzzwords that he did not actually understand to manipulate the hardworking people who had dedicated their lives to our family business. I paused outside the double doors and took a slow, deep breath to steady my heart rate. I needed to be perfectly calm and completely analytical. Forensic accountants do not rely on raw emotion to win battles. We rely on cold, hard, indisputable facts and undeniable digital evidence. I reached out and pushed the heavy oak doors open, stepping into the massive boardroom. The room was packed with dozens of regional managers and senior administrative staff. They were all sitting around a giant mahogany conference table, looking extremely worried and highly confused today. Jamal was standing at the head of the table wearing his custom-tailored gray suit. He was pacing back and forth, waving his hands dramatically as he spoke. Ashley was sitting right next to him wearing a pristine white designer dress and playing the role of the devoted, supportive corporate wife. Sitting quietly near the back of the room were 5 men and women wearing conservative dark suits. Jamal had introduced them to the staff as private equity investors who were going to save the company from my father's supposed financial ruin. Jamal stopped speaking the exact second I walked into the room. His handsome face dropped into a mask of pure, unadulterated annoyance and deep, bubbling anger. He glared at me across the long conference table. He thought he had already defeated me earlier today at the country club and the front porch of the estate. He had absolutely no idea that I had just spent the last 2 hours tracking his stolen money and organizing a federal sting operation right under his nose. He crossed his arms over his chest and let out a loud, arrogant, heavy sigh, displaying his intense, profound displeasure. He asked me why I was here, and if I had come to watch him take everything. I did not answer him immediately. I walked slowly and deliberately toward the front of the room, maintaining perfect professional composure. I reached the head of the table and turned around to face the heavy oak double doors I had just walked through. I reached out and turned the thick brass lock until it clicked loudly into place. I locked the doors from the inside, ensuring that nobody could leave this room until I was completely finished. Jamal watched me lock the doors, and he let out a short, nasty laugh. He told me I was acting like a crazy, dramatic woman. He ordered the security guard standing near the back wall to remove me from the premises immediately. The guards hesitated, looking from Jamal to me, unsure of who possessed the actual true authority in this building. I ignored my brother completely. I walked over to the main media console at the front of the room and placed my heavy leather tote bag onto the polished wood surface. I reached inside and pulled out my thin silver laptop smoothly. I connected my computer to the overhead projection system using a thick black cable. The massive white screen behind Jamal instantly illuminated with the bright blue glow of my custom forensic accounting software. I turned to face my brother and looked him dead in the eyes. I told him I did not come here to watch him take everything today. I told him I came here to show him exactly how a real professional accountant works. Jamal scoffed loudly and rolled his eyes, attempting to maintain his facade of absolute superiority in front of his staff. He told the regional managers to ignore my pathetic display. He claimed I was just an estranged bitter sister who was actively trying to sabotage a highly lucrative corporate buyout that would supposedly double their salaries. He pointed to the 5 conservative-looking people sitting quietly at the back of the long table. He announced proudly that these wealthy private equity investors were ready to wire millions of dollars into the company accounts as soon as the liquidation paperwork was signed today. He told me I was making a massive fool of myself in front of very highly important, respected people. I smiled a very slow, cold, knowing smile. I looked at the 5 quiet individuals and then turned my attention back to my arrogant brother. I told Jamal that his extreme ignorance was truly a spectacular thing to witness. I explained to the entire crowded room that the 5 people sitting at the table were not private equity investors at all. I stated clearly and loudly that the 2 individuals on the left side of the table were special agents operating directly under the authority of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I then pointed to the 3 individuals on the right side and introduced them as senior criminal investigators from the Internal Revenue Service. The entire boardroom erupted into a chaotic chorus of shocked gasps and frantic whispers. The regional managers stared at the federal agents in absolute stunned disbelief. Jamal physically stumbled backward, hitting his hip against the edge of the heavy mahogany table. His face turned the color of pale chalk as the horrifying reality of his situation began to crush his fragile ego. He looked desperately at the 5 federal agents, praying that I was just making up a crazy, massive, highly dramatic lie. The lead Federal Bureau of Investigation agent slowly stood up from his leather chair. He reached into the inner pocket of his dark suit jacket and pulled out a gold shield enclosed in a black leather wallet. He held the official federal badge high in the air for everyone in the room to see clearly. He stated in a deep, authoritative voice that they were currently executing an active criminal warrant regarding massive wire fraud and elder exploitation. Jamal's breathing became incredibly shallow and rapid. He began sweating profusely under the bright fluorescent lights of the boardroom. His eyes darted wildly around the locked room, searching desperately for any possible escape route. He turned to Ashley, who was sitting frozen in her chair with a look of pure, unadulterated terror plastered across her pale face. Jamal grabbed her shoulder roughly and leaned down to whisper frantically in her ear. I told her they needed to initiate the final offshore wire transfers right now so they could run away before the agents placed them in heavy steel handcuffs. He foolishly believed that his wife was still his loyal, devoted partner in this massive, elaborate, ongoing criminal conspiracy. I watched my brother panic and felt a deep, profound sense of righteous satisfaction. I tapped the keyboard of my laptop and advanced the presentation to the very next slide. A massive, highly detailed flowchart appeared on the glowing white screen behind him. It displayed the exact global money trail of the $1.2 million they had stolen from my father's retirement accounts the previous night. I used a red laser pointer to highlight the 3 domestic shell companies Jamal had created in Delaware. I explained to the federal agents and the shocked corporate staff exactly how Jamal had attempted to launder the stolen funds using fake restaurant supply invoices. Jamal stared at the screen in total absolute horror. He realized his secret financial crimes were completely exposed for the entire world to see. But the true masterpiece of my presentation was yet to come. I advanced the slide one more time. The screen shifted to display the final international wire transfer routing numbers and the ultimate destination of the stolen money. The bright red text clearly showed the private Swiss bank account located in Geneva, Switzerland. Jamal looked at the screen and frowned in extremely deep confusion. I did not recognize the Swiss banking details at all. He had instructed his offshore brokers to hold the money in the Cayman Islands under his own hidden corporate entity. He looked at me with wild, desperate eyes and demanded to know what I had done to his money. I turned off the red laser pointer and placed it gently on the wooden console. I told Jamal that I did not touch a single penny of his stolen money today. I simply followed the digital breadcrumbs that someone else had left behind. I looked directly at Ashley, who was trembling violently in her expensive designer dress. I told Jamal he was asking the wrong sister about the missing fortune. I suggested he ask his beautiful, supportive, loyal wife why the $1.2 million had been secretly routed into a private European account registered exclusively under her own maiden name. Jamal's jaw dropped wide open. He slowly turned his head to look at Ashley. His entire world was shattering into a million tiny jagged pieces right in front of his eyes. He asked her what I was talking about, his voice cracking with intense emotional agonizing pain and profound disbelief. Ashley could not even look her husband in the eyes. She stared down at her trembling manicured hands, completely unable to formulate a single coherent lie to save herself. I decided to deliver the final devastating blow to my brother's fragile, shattered ego. I tapped my keyboard one last time, and the final slide appeared on the massive screen. It was a high-resolution copy of a confirmed international flight itinerary. I read the details out loud so there could be absolutely no misunderstandings in the quiet, locked room. I announced that Ashley had purchased a premium first-class ticket on a direct flight to Paris, departing from Charlotte at exactly 5 o'clock this evening. I emphasized the fact that she had only purchased one single solitary ticket for herself. I told Jamal that his devoted wife was planning to abandon him to face the federal prison sentence alone while she escaped to Europe to live like a queen on our father's stolen fortune. Jamal stared at the flight itinerary and let out a broken, agonizing sound that was half sob and half scream. He finally understood the full, terrifying depth of her wicked, total betrayal today. He was ruined completely and entirely forever. His entire life was officially over right in this room because of her greedy, selfish choices, which left him absolutely completely empty-handed. The heavy silence in the executive boardroom was absolutely suffocating. Jamal stood frozen at the head of the long mahogany conference table, staring blankly at the massive white projection screen. The high-resolution image of the solo first-class flight itinerary of Ashley was glowing brightly, reflecting in his wide, terrified eyes. The absolute magnitude of her profound betrayal was slowly sinking into his arrogant mind. He had spent his entire adult life manipulating our father and stealing from our family business, but he never once suspected that his beautiful, supportive wife was manipulating him even more ruthlessly. He thought he was the ultimate mastermind of this massive financial fraud. He thought they were equal partners in crime, preparing to live a luxurious life together in Europe. He had absolutely no idea that he was nothing more than a convenient, disposable pawn in her greedy, selfish game. I watched the exact moment the fragile ego of my brother completely shattered into a million tiny, jagged pieces. His broad shoulders slumped forward and his chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. He slowly turned his head away from the glowing screen and looked down at Ashley. She was still sitting in her plush leather executive chair, wearing her pristine white designer dress. Her face was entirely pale, and her manicured hands were gripping the edges of the wooden table so tightly that her knuckles were stark white. Jamal looked at her with an expression of pure agonizing heartbreak and profound devastating confusion. He asked her in a quiet, trembling voice why she only bought one single ticket to Paris. He asked her where his ticket was and why the private Swiss bank account was registered exclusively under her maiden name. Ashley did not answer him immediately. She stared down at the polished wood surface of the table, completely unable to meet the desperate, pleading gaze of her husband. The 5 federal agents sitting at the back of the room watched the dramatic scene unfold with intense professional vigilance. The regional managers and senior administrative staff held their collective breath, waiting to see what the golden child of the family would do now that his entire world was collapsing around him. Jamal took a slow, unsteady step toward his wife. He reached out with a shaking hand and gently touched her shoulder. He begged her to tell him this was just a massive, terrible misunderstanding. He pleaded with her to explain that my forensic accounting software had made a glitch or a mistake. He desperately needed her to validate his fragile reality and tell him she still loved him today. But Ashley was a highly calculated survivor. She was a woman who had spent her entire life weaponizing her privilege and using the people around her for her own personal financial gain. She realized in that exact terrifying moment that the federal authorities had them completely surrounded. She knew that the undeniable digital evidence I had just presented was absolutely flawless and completely irrefutable. She knew that the $1.2 million sitting in her secret Swiss bank account was officially frozen, and she was not getting on any flight to Europe tonight. The only thing she cared about now was saving herself from spending the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Ashley suddenly stood up from her leather chair, moving so incredibly fast that the heavy piece of furniture tipped over backward and crashed loudly onto the carpeted floor. She aggressively slapped the shaking hand of Jamal away from her shoulder. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated revulsion and deep theatrical panic. She looked at the man she had promised to love and cherish, and she instantly, coldly, ruthlessly turned him into her ultimate scapegoat. She ripped her massive diamond wedding ring off her left hand and threw it violently directly at the face of Jamal. The heavy ring bounced off his cheekbone and clattered across the mahogany conference table. Ashley began screaming at the absolute top of her lungs. Her voice echoed wildly through the locked executive boardroom, filling the space with manufactured hysterical terror. She screamed that Jamal was a monster and a dangerous, abusive criminal. She claimed that he had forced her to participate in this massive illegal scheme against her own free will. She stumbled backward away from Jamal, deliberately putting physical distance between them to make herself look incredibly vulnerable and completely helpless. She turned her wide, tear-filled blue eyes directly toward the 2 special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She utilized the absolute ultimate weapon in her manipulative arsenal. She deployed her white tears to paint herself as the innocent, terrified victim of a large, aggressive, predatory black man. She sobbed loudly and dramatically, covering her face with her trembling hands. She cried out that Jamal had been physically and emotionally abusing her for years in secret. She told the federal agents that Jamal had threatened to harm her severely if she did not help him forge the commercial real estate documents and steal the retirement funds from my elderly father. I stood near the media console, watching her spectacular, flawless theatrical performance with deep, profound disgust. I knew exactly what she was doing because I had seen women like her do it 1,000 times before. She was banking entirely on the deep systemic racial biases of the law enforcement officers in the room. She was desperately hoping that the sight of a weeping, fragile white woman pointing a trembling finger at an angry black man would trigger their protective instincts and instantly validate her fake narrative of victimhood. She was trying to completely erase her own active, eager participation in the systematic destruction of my family. Jamal stared at his hysterical, crying wife in total, absolute, horrific disbelief. His mind simply could not process the astronomical level of her cold, calculated treachery. He had loved her. He had worshipped her. He had turned his back on his own flesh and blood father just to provide her with the lavish, luxurious lifestyle she constantly demanded. And now she was standing in front of federal agents, eagerly trying to send him to prison for the rest of his natural life just to save her own skin. The profound, devastating heartbreak in the eyes of Jamal suddenly vanished. It was instantly rapidly replaced by a surge of pure explosive manic rage. The realization that he had been played for an absolute fool by the woman he loved snapped the very last remaining thread of his sanity. He let out a primal, agonizing roar that shook the walls of the executive boardroom. He did not care about the federal agents anymore. He did not care about the stunned regional managers watching him. He only cared about destroying the woman who had just destroyed his entire life. Jamal lunged aggressively across the space separating them. He reached out with both hands, his fingers curled into tight, violent claws, aiming directly for the throat of Ashley. He screamed that she was an evil, manipulative liar, and that she was the one who had convinced him to betray our father. Ashley shrieked in genuine terror as Jamal closed the distance between them. She threw her hands up to protect her face, stumbling backward until her spine hit the heavy oak paneling of the boardroom wall. Before the angry hands of Jamal could even touch her, the room exploded into rapid, coordinated physical action. The two special agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation moved with incredible lightning speed and absolute precise tactical training. They did not draw their weapons, but they closed the distance in a fraction of a second. The lead agent grabbed Jamal firmly by his custom-tailored suit jacket and spun him around violently. The second agent swept the legs of Jamal out from under him, executing a flawless dynamic takedown maneuver. Jamal hit the thick plush carpet hard, knocking the breath completely out of his lungs. The three criminal investigators from the Internal Revenue Service quickly stepped forward to form a protective physical barrier between the struggling men on the floor and the panicking corporate staff sitting at the table. I watched calmly from the front of the room, completely unbothered by the sudden chaotic violence. I did not flinch or move a single muscle as the federal agents pinned my brother securely to the ground. Jamal fought wildly, thrashing his body and kicking his expensive Italian leather shoes against the floor. He screamed a continuous stream of angry, bitter profanities directed entirely at his wife. He called her a thief, a liar, and a ruthless, opportunistic predator. He yelled that he had given her everything she ever wanted, and she had repaid him by stabbing him directly in the back. The lead federal agent pressed his knee firmly into the center of the back of Jamal, pinning him securely to the carpet. The second agent grabbed the flailing wrists of Jamal and pulled them roughly behind his back. The distinct, sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoed loudly through the silent, terrified boardroom. Jamal stopped struggling, the exact second the cold steel locked tightly around his wrists. The fight completely drained out of his body, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, empty shell of a man. He lay on the floor, breathing heavily, his cheek pressed hard against the carpet. He had lost his money, his power, his freedom, and his wife all in the span of 10 incredibly devastating minutes. The golden child of the family, the arrogant man who thought he was smarter and better than everyone else was, now just a pathetic handcuffed criminal lying in the dirt. I stood at the media console watching her fake innocent display with absolute crystal-clear focus. I waited for her to finish her pathetic little performance. I waited until the entire crowded room fell completely quiet, and the only sound was the heavy, ragged breathing of my brother lying handcuffed on the floor. I placed my hands firmly on the polished wood of the console and looked directly at my sister-in-law. I spoke in a voice that was smooth, calm, and devoid of any sympathy or emotion. I told her not to celebrate so fast. I told Ashley that her spectacular dramatic performance was truly a sight to behold, but it was completely and entirely useless here today. I told her that forensic accountants do not base their findings on tears or emotional manipulation. We base our findings on hard, permanent digital records and undeniable electronic evidence. I reminded her that numbers never lie and numbers never care about who is crying the loudest. I pressed a single silver button on my laptop keyboard, and the giant projection screen behind my brother flickered for a brief second. A new, highly detailed digital file appeared on the bright white surface. It was a large green audio waveform representing a recovered voicemail message. Ashley stared at the screen and her tear-filled eyes suddenly darted rapidly back and forth. The carefully constructed mask of innocent victimhood on her face began to slip, revealing the cold, calculating panic underneath. She realized that I had not just followed the money trail, but I had also dug deeply into their private corporate communications. I looked at the lead federal agent and explained exactly how I obtained this specific piece of digital evidence. I told him that when Jamal took over the executive operations of the Soul food chain, he foolishly integrated all of his personal and professional mobile devices into the main company cloud server. He did this because he wanted the company to pay for his expensive data plans, but he completely failed to understand that doing so gave the primary accounting administrator full legal access to the server backup files. I reached forward and hit the play button on my media console. The crisp, high-fidelity audio filled the silent executive boardroom. It was the voice of Ashley, but it was not the soft, trembling, terrified voice she had just used to beg the federal agents for mercy. It was a cold, sharp, demanding tone dripping with absolute arrogance and profound disdain. The recording captured a voicemail she had left for Jamal late yesterday afternoon, just hours before the massive storm hit the city of Charlotte. "Jamal, you need to listen to me and do exactly what I say," her recorded voice echoed loudly across the room. "Take the old man to that boarded-up motel on Route 85. Leave him under the awning so nobody sees him from the main highway, and make sure you take his mobile phone away. We need him completely out of the picture for at least 10 hours, so I can bypass his security alerts. I will handle the final wire transfers from the office while you keep him distracted. Do not mess this up, Jamal, or we lose everything." The entire boardroom erupted in a collective gasp of pure horror. The regional managers and senior staff members looked at Ashley with expressions of absolute profound disgust. They had all known and loved my father for years. They knew he was a kind, generous man who had built this company with his own bare hands. Hearing this privileged, arrogant woman casually order her husband to dump an elderly sick man into a freezing storm like a piece of garbage was incredibly shocking to every single person in the room. Ashley frantically shook her head and took a clumsy step toward the federal agents. She held her hands up in a desperate pleading gesture. She stammered and cried, claiming that the audio recording was completely fake. She told the agents that I was a bitter, jealous sister who had used artificial intelligence software to generate a fake voice memo to frame her. She swore on her life that she would never do something so incredibly evil and heartless. I did not even let her finish her pathetic, frantic lie. I did not raise my voice or show any anger. I simply tapped the spacebar on my laptop and brought up the very next slide. The screen shifted from the audio waveform to a massive, dense spreadsheet of complex computer code and time-stamped data entries. I turned to the criminal investigators from the Internal Revenue Service because I knew they would understand exactly what they were looking at. I explained that what they were seeing on the screen was a comprehensive keystroke logging report. I told the room that when I noticed the first subtle financial anomalies in the company accounts a few months ago, I quietly installed a remote diagnostic keylogger on the main executive banking portal. I did this legally as the Chief Financial Compliance Officer to monitor for potential external hacking threats. But the threat was not external at all. The threat was sitting right across the dinner table from my brother. I pointed to the specific lines of code on the projection screen. I explained the basic science of keystroke dynamics to the federal agents and the corporate staff. I told them that every single person types with a unique, distinct rhythm and specific speed. It is a digital fingerprint that is almost impossible to fake or disguise. I highlighted the final execution sequence for the $1.2 million wire transfer. I showed everyone the exact Internet Protocol address and the specific media access control address of the computer that finalized the theft. The data definitively proved that the transfer was not executed from Jamal's mobile phone or his personal laptop. The massive illegal financial transaction was executed from a desktop computer located inside the private real estate agency where Ashley used to work. Furthermore, the keystroke rhythm perfectly matched the typing profile of Ashley. She had logged into the banking portal using Jamal's stolen administrative credentials and routed the money directly into her own private Swiss bank account, while Jamal was busy abandoning our father in the freezing rain. The agent grabbed her wrist firmly and spun her around. The sharp metallic sound of heavy steel handcuffs clicking closed around her wrists echoed loudly in the silent room. The reality of her situation finally crashed down upon her with the crushing weight of a collapsing building. Her smug, arrogant facade completely shattered into a million tiny, unrecoverable pieces. The delicate crying and the soft pleading vanished instantly. She transformed into a feral, terrified animal. Ashley began screaming at the top of her lungs. It was an ugly, hysterical, piercing sound that hurt my ears. She thrashed her body wildly against the grip of the federal agent, kicking her expensive designer shoes against the carpeted floor. She screamed that she was a wealthy, respectable woman, and they had no right to treat her like a common street criminal. She threatened to sue the entire federal government and demanded to speak to her lawyer immediately. The second federal agent stepped in to assist his partner. Together they marched the screaming, struggling woman toward the heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom. She fought them every single step of the way, her pristine white designer dress becoming wrinkled and disheveled in the frantic physical struggle. She looked absolutely pathetic and completely ruined. Her carefully constructed illusion of elite superiority was completely destroyed in front of the very corporate staff she had always treated with such profound disrespect and deep condescension. The regional managers watched her being dragged away in heavy steel handcuffs, and not a single person in the room offered her an ounce of sympathy. I walked over to the heavy oak double doors and unlocked them, pulling them wide open so the federal agents could escort their prisoners out into the main hallway. The three criminal investigators from the Internal Revenue Service hauled Jamal up from the floor. My brother looked completely broken and utterly defeated. His custom-tailored gray suit was twisted and stained with sweat. His handsome, charismatic face was swollen and stained with tears of genuine, profound heartbreak and massive humiliation. He had lost absolutely everything he valued in this world because he allowed his greed and his arrogant wife to poison his mind against his own flesh and blood. The agents gripped his arms tightly and began dragging him toward the open doorway to follow his screaming wife out to the waiting police cruisers. As Jamal was dragged past the media console where I was standing, he suddenly stopped struggling and dug his expensive leather shoes into the carpet. He turned his head and looked directly at me. His eyes were burning with a mixture of intense, unadulterated hatred and deep, agonizing sorrow. He simply could not accept that his quiet, boring sister had systematically dismantled his entire life in less than 24 hours. "What did you do?" he screamed at me, his voice cracking with raw, emotional pain. "You ruined your own family. You destroyed my entire life." I did not raise my voice. I did not show any anger or any sadness. I stood perfectly straight with my head held high and my shoulders pulled back. I looked him dead in the eye and delivered the final absolute truth that he needed to hear before he spent the next 2 decades rotting in a federal prison cell. "I did exactly what Dad taught us to do," I replied, my voice calm, steady, and completely resolute. "I protected the family legacy from people who wanted to destroy it. You are just the trash I had to take out." Jamal stared at me, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly, as the profound, devastating truth of my words struck him straight in the heart. He had no defense and no argument left to make. The federal agents pulled him roughly by the shoulders, dragging him out of the boardroom and down the long carpeted hallway toward the executive elevator. I watched them go, listening to the fading sounds of Ashley's hysterical screaming and the heavy footsteps of the law enforcement officers. I stood in the doorway until the elevator doors slid shut completely, removing the toxic, poisonous presence of my brother and his wicked wife from our family business forever. I turned back around and faced the crowded executive boardroom. The room was incredibly quiet. The regional managers and senior administrative staff were still sitting around the large mahogany conference table, processing the massive explosive events that had just unfolded right in front of their eyes. They looked at me with a newfound sense of deep, profound respect and intense professional admiration. They realized that the quiet numbers girl they had always overlooked was actually the fierce, intelligent protector of their livelihoods and their careers. I walked calmly back to the media console and looked at my silver laptop. The digital tracking software was still glowing brightly on the screen, displaying the frozen $1.2 million sitting uselessly in the private Swiss bank account. I reached out and typed a final complex command sequence into my encrypted keyboard. I bypassed the temporary security freeze using the federal injunction clearance codes provided by DeAndre and the federal agents. I initiated a direct, immediate reverse wire transfer protocol. I watched the progress bar inch forward on my screen, holding my breath, as the secure international banking servers communicated with each other across the globe. A bright green confirmation message flashed across my screen, accompanied by a soft, pleasant digital chime. I hit the final execution button on my tablet, officially routing the recovered $1.2 million straight back into the highly secure, irrevocable trust account belonging to my father. The family fortune was finally safe, and the legacy of my parents was completely permanently protected from any future harm. I closed my laptop with a firm, satisfying click and smiled at the room, ready to rebuild everything they had tried to destroy. 3 months passed since that explosive afternoon inside the locked executive boardroom. The harsh, cold winter finally surrendered to a beautiful, crisp, sunny morning in the heart of Charlotte, North Carolina. The sky above the city was a brilliant, clear shade of azure blue without a single dark cloud in sight. Today marked the grand reopening of our flagship property, but it was no longer just a traditional restaurant. My father had decided to transform the massive commercial space into a state-of-the-art culinary training center, specifically designed for underprivileged youth in our local community. The newly renovated brick building stood tall and proud on the corner of the busy intersection. The large glass windows gleamed in the bright morning sunlight, reflecting the vibrant, bustling energy of the neighborhood. The air outside smelled incredibly sweet and savory, carrying the familiar, comforting aroma of fried chicken, collard greens, and warm peach cobbler. Hundreds of people from the community gathered around the front entrance, buzzing with intense, genuine excitement and profound local pride. They were here to celebrate the rebirth of a beloved institution that had almost been completely destroyed by greed and deception. I stood near the front of the massive crowd, watching my father interact with the people who had supported his business for over 4 decades. Elijah was a completely transformed man today. 3 months ago, I found him shivering and helpless in a wheelchair outside an abandoned motel. Today, he was standing tall and walking independently with the assistance of a polished wooden cane. The deep dark circles under his eyes had entirely vanished. His rich brown skin glowed with renewed health and absolute profound vitality. He wore a sharp, tailored navy blue suit that commanded respect and projected quiet, dignified authority. He smiled brightly as he shook hands with old friends and hugged longtime loyal customers. He looked healthier and prouder than I had ever seen him in my entire life. The mild pneumonia that nearly took him away from me was nothing but a distant, fading memory now. He had reclaimed his rightful place as the beloved, respected patriarch of our family and the undeniable cornerstone of this tight-knit community. The stark, beautiful reality of my father's triumphant recovery stood in massive, sharp contrast to the miserable, pathetic fate of my brother and his wicked wife. Jamal was currently sitting inside a tiny concrete cell at the county detention center, awaiting his official federal trial. The criminal investigators from the Internal Revenue Service had completely dismantled his entire fraudulent financial network. They uncovered years of massive tax evasion and severe corporate embezzlement. The federal prosecutors were confidently seeking a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years in a high-security federal penitentiary. His expensive custom suits and luxury-leased sports cars were gone forever. He had absolutely no money left to hire a fancy defense attorney because the government had seized every single asset he falsely claimed to own. The golden child of the family, who once thought he was a brilliant, untouchable mastermind, was now just another documented federal inmate facing a long, dark, miserable future behind thick iron bars. Ashley faced a similarly devastating and entirely well-deserved downfall. When the federal agents presented her with the undeniable digital evidence of her international wire fraud and her secret Swiss bank account, her arrogant facade completely shattered. She realized she could not manipulate or cry her way out of a massive federal indictment. She immediately turned state evidence against my brother and accepted a restrictive plea deal to avoid spending decades in prison. But the plea deal came with a massive, catastrophic personal cost. The federal judge ordered the complete total asset forfeiture of everything she owned. She lost every single dime of her hidden offshore wealth. She lost her expensive designer clothes, her lavish lifestyle, and her pristine country club reputation. She was permanently stripped of her real estate license and permanently banned from working in the financial sector. The wealthy elite social circles she had always desperately clung to completely abandoned her overnight. She was currently working a minimum wage retail job while living in a tiny cramped apartment, serving a grueling 10-year probation sentence. Her spectacular greed had ultimately left her with absolutely nothing but intense public humiliation and profound lifelong disgrace. A loud, joyful cheer erupted from the large crowd, bringing my focus back to the beautiful, sunny present moment. Pastor Davis stepped up to the wooden podium that had been set up right in front of the main entrance to the culinary training center. He adjusted the microphone and looked out over the sea of smiling faces with a deeply proud and highly reverent expression. He spoke with a booming, powerful voice that carried effortlessly over the quiet, respectful crowd. He talked about the enduring, resilient spirit of our community and the profound importance of protecting our shared cultural heritage. He praised my father for his unwavering dedication to uplifting the next generation of young Black entrepreneurs. He spoke about how the dark, treacherous storms of life often attempt to wash away our hard-earned foundations, but faith and family will always guide us back to the light. The congregation responded with loud, passionate affirmations and joyous applause. Pastor Davis then lowered his voice slightly, adopting a much more personal and deeply serious tone. He told the crowd that this magnificent culinary center would not be standing here today if not for the fierce, relentless dedication of one specific individual. He announced that the family legacy had been rescued from the absolute brink of total destruction by a guardian who worked quietly, but struck with the powerful, undeniable force of truth. He called my name and asked me to join my father up on the main stage. The entire crowd turned to look at me, and a massive wave of thunderous applause echoed through the vibrant city streets. I felt a deep, profound sense of emotional warmth radiate through my entire chest as I walked slowly toward the wooden platform. I walked up the short steps feeling completely grounded and absolutely secure in my own skin. I was wearing a sharp-tailored emerald green suit that perfectly complemented my complexion. My natural box braids were styled immaculately, falling elegantly over my shoulders. I no longer looked or felt like the quiet, boring numbers girl my family had always dismissed and ignored. I felt like a powerful, highly capable woman who had successfully defended her family against ruthless, cunning predators. I reached the center of the stage, and my father turned to face me. He leaned heavily on his polished wooden cane, but his arms were completely open. I stepped into his embrace, and he pulled me into a tight, fiercely protective hug. He pressed his face against my shoulder and whispered softly into my ear, telling me that I saved them and that I saved absolutely everything. I held him tightly, fighting back the sudden rush of happy, triumphant tears that threatened to spill down my cheeks. I pulled back and looked directly into his kind, weathered eyes, silently promising him that I would always be here to protect him. I turned to face the massive crowd of community members, friends, and supportive neighbors. Pastor Davis gently handed me the microphone and stepped back, allowing me to take complete, total control of the moment. The crowd fell completely silent, waiting eagerly for me to speak. I looked out over the thriving, vibrant neighborhood, taking a slow, deep breath of the crisp, fresh morning air. I thought about the freezing rain at the abandoned motel. I thought about the incredible arrogance of Ashley in my office. I thought about the profound, satisfying defeat of Jamal in the locked executive boardroom. I told the crowd that the people who tried to destroy us thought they could leave us out in the cold, freezing rain. I kept my voice ringing out clear and incredibly steady across the silent audience. I explained that they honestly thought they could discard the man who built this entire community simply because he was getting older. I stated that they thought they could steal a lifetime of hard, honest work in the dark of night and just walk away completely unpunished. I paused, letting the heavy, profound truth of my words sink into the hearts of everyone listening. I told the community that those predators looked at me and thought because I was quiet, and because I just sat behind a desk and crunched boring numbers all day, that I would not fight back. I declared that they had completely underestimated my intelligence, my dedication, and my fierce, absolute love for my father. I gripped the microphone tighter, feeling the powerful surge of righteous, resilient energy flowing through my veins. I continued my speech, my voice growing louder and much more passionate. I told everyone that the people who tried to ruin us forgot one massive, incredibly important thing about our people and about this specific family. I shouted that they forgot that our roots run far too deep to ever be washed away by a sudden temporary storm. I reminded the crowd that we have spent generations building our businesses brick by brick and dollar by dollar against insurmountable systemic odds. I proclaimed that we do not break easily, and we absolutely never surrender our legacy to greedy, opportunistic predators. I looked directly at my father, who was nodding proudly with tears shining brightly in his eyes. I turned back to the crowd and delivered my final resounding message, stating that if anyone ever tries to uproot us, we will completely, permanently break their foundation. The crowd erupted into a massive, deafening roar of absolute approval and profound, joyful celebration. People cheered loudly, clapping their hands and raising their voices in a powerful, unified chorus of community triumph. My father stepped forward with a pair of oversized ceremonial golden scissors. He looked at me and smiled, offering me one side of the handles. We gripped the heavy scissors together and cleanly sliced through the thick, bright red ribbon stretching across the entrance of the Culinary Training Center. The ribbon fell away, fluttering gracefully to the concrete ground, marking the official, beautiful beginning of a brand new, highly promising chapter for our family and our entire neighborhood. The dark, oppressive shadow of my brother and his wicked wife was completely, permanently erased from our bright, hopeful future. The meticulous process of untangling the financial mess left behind by Jamal and Ashley had taken weeks of grueling, complex work. I had to coordinate directly with federal prosecutors and international banking authorities to ensure every single stolen asset was properly repatriated to the correct domestic accounts. It involved hundreds of hours of analyzing banking codes, tracing offshore wire transfers, and providing sworn expert testimony in federal court hearings. I presented the court with irrefutable keystroke logs and geolocation data that completely dismantled any possible legal defense my brother or his wife could attempt to mount. The federal judges were incredibly impressed by the sheer depth and absolute precision of my forensic accounting reports. They utilized my digital evidence to secure swift, severe indictments against everyone involved in the corporate racketeering scheme. The corrupt developer who had tried to buy our property with forged deeds was also sitting in a federal holding cell, his entire criminal empire exposed and destroyed by the very documents I had dropped on his dining table at the country club. The satisfaction of watching those greedy, arrogant predators face absolute justice was immeasurable. My father's legacy was not just protected, it was actively thriving and expanding in ways we had never previously imagined. The new Culinary Training Center was already receiving massive amounts of applications from passionate young adults in the community who wanted to learn the restaurant business. We were providing them with professional skills, financial literacy classes, and a safe, supportive environment to build their own successful careers. The soul food restaurant chain was operating with perfect efficiency and record-breaking profits now that the toxic, draining influence of Jamal was permanently removed from the corporate structure. My father spent his days mentoring the new students and sharing the beloved recipes my mother had created so many years ago. His health was robust, his spirit was vibrant, and his heart was completely full. Our family bond had been tested by an unimaginable storm of betrayal and greed, but we had emerged from the darkness much stronger and infinitely more resilient than ever before. We had weathered the absolute worst they could throw at us, and we had secured a beautiful, enduring future built on a foundation of absolute truth and unconditional love. Later that evening, long after the grand reopening celebration had finally concluded and the crowds had happily dispersed, I sat alone in my quiet, peaceful home office. The soft, warm glow of a desk lamp illuminated the room, creating a calm, highly comforting atmosphere. My father was sleeping soundly and securely in the guest bedroom down the hall, completely safe from any future harm or exploitation. I sat down in my ergonomic leather chair and opened my thin silver laptop. The machine hummed to life, instantly connecting to my highly secure encrypted financial networks. I logged into the primary administrative portal for the irrevocable trust, using my multi-factor authentication credentials. The dashboard loaded smoothly, displaying the complex, comprehensive overview of our entire family wealth portfolio. I scrolled carefully through the digital ledgers, verifying that every single account was perfectly balanced and absolutely secure. The recovered funds were sitting safely in a high-yield protected treasury bond. The commercial real estate properties, including the newly launched culinary training center, were all legally shielded behind impenetrable corporate trust walls. There were absolutely no unauthorized pending transactions, no hidden offshore shell companies, and no fraudulent digital notary stamps trying to steal our hard-earned wealth. The numbers on the screen were steadily, securely growing, projecting a highly stable, incredibly prosperous financial future for generations to come. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long, slow breath of absolute, pure, unadulterated peace. I had spent my entire life being dismissed as the boring, invisible sister who only cared about math and dry financial regulations. But those same regulations and those same complex numbers had been the exact ultimate weapons I used to deliver absolute devastating justice. I proved that you do not need to be loud or arrogant or performative to be incredibly powerful. True lasting power comes from sharp intelligence, unwavering loyalty, and the quiet, patient ability to track the truth until it corners the guilty. I looked at the glowing screen one last time, watching the family assets sitting perfectly safe and completely untouchable. I smiled a deep, genuinely satisfied smile and slowly closed the laptop, letting the screen fade completely to black. The greatest lesson from this entire ordeal is that true power does not always roar or wear an expensive tailored suit. Sometimes real strength is found in the quiet, observant people who sit in the background and pay close attention to the details. Greedy, manipulative predators will always try to use your silence as a weakness, but you can use their arrogant ignorance as your ultimate weapon. Always protect your family legacy by equipping yourself with undeniable knowledge and absolute truth. Because raw numbers never lie, and they absolutely never ever forget the terrible sins of those corrupt, greedy thieves. Please share your own story in the comments below and hit the subscribe button if you have ever successfully outsmarted a highly toxic relative.